The cold walls of the FBI Academy at Quantico stood silent as the day began. Inside, rows of trainees were already at work, jogging, reading profiles, firing rounds at practice targets. Among them was a woman who stood out, not because she demanded attention, but because she was wholly immersed in her goal. Her name was Clarice Starling. Clarice, only in her mid-20s, had intense eyes, sharp features, and a mind that never stopped working. She had grown up in West Virginia, a place she didn't talk much about. Her life hadn't been easy. Loss, struggle, and loneliness had shaped her, but she had forged herself into a determined learner and survivor. Now, she was climbing the ranks of the FBI, eager to prove herself. One morning, Clarice was pulled from her training session and called to the office of Jack Crawford, the head of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. He was calm and experienced, but she could tell something unusual was going on. He wasn't just giving her a field assignment. He was recruiting her for something much stranger. Crawford gave her a folder. Inside it was a name, Dr. Hannibal Lecter. She looked at the words on the page and read about a brilliant psychiatrist who had once been one of the most respected minds in Baltimore, before he was discovered to be a murderer. Not just a killer. A cannibal. He had killed 9 people and eaten parts of some of them. For 8 years, he had been held at the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. Clarice was confused at first. Why send her, a trainee, to meet such a dangerous man? Crawford explained that Lecter might help them catch another killer, one they couldn't find. This new killer was being called Buffalo Bill by the media. The name was cruel, based on what he did to his victims. He skinned them. Every time he killed, he removed large sections of their skin from specific parts of the body. It was horrifying. The FBI had no leads. They needed insight, and Lecter, for all his crimes, had a brilliant mind. Crawford believed Lecter might spot a pattern or clue in the case that they couldn't. But Lecter didn't speak to anyone anymore. He ignored everyone. Crawford hoped a young, smart, determined woman like Clarice might be the key. Maybe Lecter would talk to her. And so, Clarice Starling's journey into darkness began. She traveled to Baltimore, to the cold, underground prison where Hannibal Lecter was kept. She passed through layers of security, doors with buzzers and guards with guns. She met Dr. Frederick Chilton, the administrator of the hospital. Chilton was proud, self-important, and seemed more interested in his status than in the safety of his patients or staff. He told Clarice about Lecter's crimes with a strange mixture of fear and excitement. Chilton warned her, Lecter was not like other men. He could see through people, their lies, their masks. He had a way of getting into people's minds. And when he spoke, he did so with calmness, precision, and chilling charm. Clarice was taken to Lecter's cell, made entirely of bulletproof glass, with tiny holes for air. She stood before him. He was sitting quietly, wearing white. His voice was soft, his eyes alert and piercing. "Good morning," he said calmly. Clarice introduced herself, trying not to show fear. She asked if he would answer some questions for a psychological profile. Lecter saw through the request immediately, but he didn't send her away. Instead, he played along, amused by her courage. He didn't answer the questions. Instead, he asked about her father, her dreams, her fears. She tried to keep control of the conversation, but Lecter was always one step ahead. Still, he seemed intrigued by her. She was polite, respectful, not trying to manipulate him. Before she left, he gave her a strange clue. "Look deep within yourself, Clarice." And then he said something about one of Buffalo Bill's victims, something the FBI hadn't noticed. He told her to look at the first victim, someone named Frederica Bimmel. That name would become very important. Clarice walked out of the hospital with Lecter's words stuck in her mind. Look deep within yourself. Seek out the first victim. He hadn't said much, but what he had given her was something the FBI had missed. It was a direction, a crack in the case. Outside, the wind was sharp and the skies overcast. The world moved on, unaware that deep beneath a hospital, a killer and a trainee had shared a conversation that would change everything. Back at Quantico, Clarice started reviewing the files again. She read through the case notes of Buffalo Bill's victims. There were 5 women so far, all young, all kidnapped, killed, and skinned. But when she looked at Frederica Bimmel, the supposed first victim, something clicked. The others had more brutal mutilations, but Frederica's body had been found in a river and not as heavily damaged. Maybe she wasn't the first. Maybe she was the third or fourth. And if Lecter was right, that meant the killer had a connection to her. She could be the key to who he was. Meanwhile, the world outside the FBI was starting to panic. A sixth woman, Catherine Martin, had gone missing. She was not just any woman. She was the daughter of Senator Ruth Martin, a powerful political figure. Catherine had been abducted in broad daylight after helping a man load a chair into a van. A kind act had led to her capture. The FBI now had a full-blown crisis. Inside a hidden house, Catherine Martin was alive, but barely. She had been taken to a cold, strange basement. The man who took her was James Gum, though no one knew his name yet. He called himself nothing. He was quiet, patient, and deeply disturbed. He kept Catherine in a deep, dark well in the center of his basement. There, she screamed for help, scratched the walls, and pleaded for her life. Gum watched her from above and spoke to her in a soft, detached voice. He had a poodle named Precious, whom he treated with more kindness than he gave his victims. As the days passed, he told Catherine to put the lotion on her skin or else she'd be sprayed with freezing water. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. He was preparing her skin. He was making something horrifying. A suit made of real human skin. A woman's suit. Because he wanted to become what he thought he should have been, a woman. Not truly transgender, but so deeply broken that this twisted project had become his path to transformation. Back at the FBI, Jack Crawford tried to manage the pressure. The media was watching. The senator was demanding answers. Time was ticking. Clarice pressed forward with her own investigation. She traveled to the small town where Frederica Bimmel had lived. There, she met the girl's father, looked at her room, her books, her sewing patterns. Everything told her this girl had been quiet, kind, and creative. She was also a skilled seamstress, and that was the real connection. Clarice had a gut feeling. The killer wasn't just skinning his victims. He was tailoring them. Each cut was surgical, methodical, not random rage. It was a design, a craft. Clarice started to build a profile in her mind. The man they were hunting wasn't just a killer. He was someone who had trained in sewing, someone who understood patterns in clothing. He chose heavier women because they gave him more material. That was the horror of it. They were being turned into something. She reported her findings, but Crawford and the rest of the team were still chasing cold leads. Meanwhile, Chilton, jealous of Clarice and desperate to be seen as a hero, made a move behind their backs. He approached Lecter and offered him a deal. Information about Catherine Martin's kidnapping, a transfer to a nicer facility, and some outside privileges, if he helped the senator. Lecter, as always, accepted with calm eyes and a secret smirk. He knew Chilton was playing a game, but Lecter never played someone else's game, only his own. Soon, Lecter was flown under heavy security to Memphis, where he was to meet Senator Martin. In a strange, controlled environment, Lecter met the senator face to face. He was polite, formal, but always watching. He offered a name, Lewis Friend. The FBI quickly began chasing this lead. But the name was fake. An anagram. Iron sulfide, also known as fool's gold. Lecter had tricked them. And worse, that same night, he escaped. It was a night soaked in rain when Dr. Hannibal Lecter made history. Inside a temporary holding cell on the top floor of the Shelby County Courthouse in Memphis, Lecter was calm. He had been given relatively civilized conditions. Books, food, a desk, a bed. On the surface, it looked like the authorities had taken every security precaution. 2 armed guards watched him closely, and everything he touched was checked and cataloged. But even then, no one truly understood what Lecter was capable of. He had been planning his escape from the moment he agreed to help with the Buffalo Bill case. Every glance, every comment, every whisper, it was part of a larger strategy. That night, as classical music played softly on a cassette player, Lecter requested his dinner. Lamb chops, rare. When the tray arrived, he thanked the officers, polite, pleasant, the very image of calm refinement. Then, with terrifying speed, he struck. In seconds, the room was a massacre. Lecter used part of the pen he had secretly hidden to pick his restraints. He attacked the guards with surgical precision. One was beaten to death. The other was disemboweled, suspended grotesquely from the cell's cage like a crucifixion. But Lecter wasn't done. When other officers burst in, they found one body on the floor, another seemingly dead on the elevator roof. An ambulance was called. Medics worked frantically on the injured officer, the one lying barely alive, with his face smashed and bleeding. What no one realized was that the man in the ambulance was not the officer at all. It was Lecter. He had cut off the guard's face and worn it like a mask, disguising himself as a victim. In a horrifying twist of genius, he escaped right under their noses. By the time they discovered the truth, by the time someone found the dead body of the real Lecter stuffed into the courthouse's maintenance room, it was too late. Lecter was gone, free, vanished into the night like a ghost with a taste for blood. Meanwhile, the real hunt continued. Clarice Starling, devastated by the news of Lecter's escape, tried to push forward. The case wasn't over. Catherine Martin was still missing, and something inside Clarice told her she was close. All the pieces were there. She just hadn't seen how they fit yet. She went back through Frederica Bimmel's belongings and made another breakthrough. Among Frederica's things, Clarice found a sewing mannequin, patterns, and photos of dresses. The girl had made her own clothes. The cuts Buffalo Bill had made on her skin matched the pattern markings of a dress, darts, and seams in all the right places. That was it. The killer was making a woman's suit. Clarice took her findings to Crawford and pushed him to look at any males who had applied for gender reassignment surgeries and were denied. As they searched, something critical happened. A lab finally returned results on a moth cocoon found inside one of the victims' throats. It was a death's head hawk moth, a species not native to the U.S. It had to have been raised, bred in captivity. That meant their killer wasn't just a tailor. He was a moth breeder, too. Inside the darkness of a filthy basement, Catherine Martin was still alive, fighting back with everything she had. She'd stopped screaming long ago. Her voice was hoarse, but her mind was working. Every time Gum came down to check on her, she took in details: the ladder, the distance, the dog. She tried to form a plan. One day, as Gum lowered a basket into the pit with lotion and instructions, Catherine lured his dog, Precious, close to the edge. With shaking hands, she grabbed the dog and pulled it into the pit. The poodle yelped and barked, and Gum panicked. He yelled, screamed, and threatened. But Catherine had leverage now. She clutched the dog and screamed back, promising to kill it if he didn't let her out. It was chaos. Gum backed off for now. He retreated upstairs, furious. But he didn't scream again. He didn't argue. He went into his workshop, a twisted room filled with fabrics, skin, and horror, and began to finish the suit. A suit made from the women he had killed. At the same time, Crawford and his team had tracked down a name: James Gum, an unstable man who had once been in foster care and later apprenticed with a famous tailor. He had applied for gender reassignment, but had been denied repeatedly. He had a violent history, including the murder of a former lover. This was their man. They followed a lead to Chicago, believing they had found his last address. SWAT teams moved in, surrounding the house. But they were wrong. Clarice, unaware of the SWAT raid, was following her own leads. She had gone to visit the old friend of Frederica Bimmel's, a woman who used to sew with her. There, the woman told her about a man who had once been close to Frederica, a man named Jack Gordon, who showed up asking questions about dress patterns. Clarice asked for the address, and that's how Clarice Starling, completely alone, ended up knocking on Buffalo Bill's front door. The house stood quiet on the edge of Belvedere, Ohio. It was old, plain, and a little run down. The lawn was patchy. Curtains were closed. A porch light buzzed faintly, even in daylight. Clarice Starling parked her car at the curb. She had no backup. She wasn't even sure this was the right place. But her instincts, sharp and trained, told her something wasn't right. There was something off about this house, about the name Jack Gordon and the way the neighbor had spoken of him. She approached the door and knocked. A man opened it, pale, slightly overweight, wearing a robe over his clothes. His hair was thin, his eyes a bit distant. He looked nervous. She introduced herself as an FBI agent. The man said his name was indeed Jack Gordon, and he seemed confused but polite. He said he had known someone who sewed, a girl named Ricky. Clarice's eyes wandered. There was a sewing machine in the next room, a mannequin, fabric on the floor, dresses, and on a shelf, a strange insect cocoon, dried and mounted in a glass jar. Her instinct screamed. This was him. She pulled out her gun, slowly. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay still," but the man, James Gum, was already backing away. His expression changed instantly. calm turned to cold calculation. Then, he vanished into the hallway. Clarice followed, gun raised. The house was a maze of dark, cluttered rooms, some filled with sewing tools, others with bird cages and half-eaten food. Then she saw the entrance to the basement. She stepped down into the shadows. The basement smelled like mold and something far worse. The lights were dim and flickered. She moved carefully, weapon ready, breath slow and steady. Doors led into more rooms, a meat freezer, a chemical tub, and then a well. A deep pit with brick walls. She heard a voice. "Help me. Please help me." It was Catherine Martin, bruised, dirty, shaking, but alive. Clarice didn't have time to process the horror. She couldn't open the well. She told Catherine to stay calm and quiet. She had to find a killer first. She moved deeper into the labyrinth. James Gum was waiting, hiding, watching her silently through night vision goggles. In the darkness, Clarice couldn't see him, but he could see her perfectly, her every movement, her face, her breathing. She reached a boiler room. Pipes hissed. Shadows shifted. She kept her gun raised, turning slowly. He followed, footsteps silent. He was only feet away. His hand trembled slightly as he raised a pistol. And then a noise. A soft click as he cocked the hammer of his gun. It was all Clarice needed. She turned and fired. A single shot, loud and final. The bullet hit Gum in the chest. He staggered backward, eyes wide with shock. He fell to the floor, unmoving. The silence returned. Clarice stood frozen, breathing heavily, gun still raised. The tension in her chest didn't break until long after she confirmed he was dead. She had done it. Alone. She had found him, stopped him, and saved Catherine Martin. Back upstairs, police finally arrived. Clarice walked out into the light, exhausted but unbroken. She had looked evil in the eye and survived. Catherine was taken to safety, her mother rushing to her side. There were cameras, reporters, and a flood of attention. But Clarice avoided all of it. She didn't do it for credit. She did it because it had to be done. A few days later, at Quantico, Clarice stood proudly among her fellow graduates. She had officially become a full FBI agent. Jack Crawford shook her hand, pride in his eyes. But in the back of her mind, she was still not at peace. That night, as the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Clarice received a letter. It was handwritten, neatly folded, and had no return address. But she recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Dr. Hannibal Lecter. The letter was chilling, polite, articulate, and cold. He congratulated her on her success, said he hoped she wasn't too traumatized. He complimented her courage and intellect. And then, with unsettling calm, he said he had no intention of coming after her. He respected her. He asked her one thing. "Tell me, Clarice, do the lambs still scream?" It was not a threat. It was a reminder of their twisted bond. She had faced evil, but some screams stay in the mind forever. Lecter ended the letter with a simple wish, that she might one day find peace. Elsewhere in the world, in a tropical country with sunlit markets and clean white linen suits, a tall man with sharp eyes watched from a distance as an older man, Dr. Frederick Chilton, exited a car. The tall man walked slowly behind him. The story wasn't over. The ceremony had ended. The official photos had been taken. Clarice Starling stood alone near the edge of the parking lot, her badge newly pinned to her chest. She was now Special Agent Starling, one of the youngest to earn the title. The spring wind brushed through her hair as she looked out at the darkening sky. It should have felt like the end of something. A victory, a closure. But in truth, it felt like something else entirely. Not relief, not joy. It felt like the start of something darker. Because the screams had not stopped. Clarice still heard them, not from outside, but from deep within her memory. The cries of helpless animals on a farm long ago. The lambs, the ones she couldn't save. The sounds that woke her in the night, even now. The same screams she had shared with Dr. Lecter in a moment of rare, dangerous intimacy. And she remembered what he'd asked her, months ago, through the thick glass of his cell. "You still wake sometimes, don't you? Wake in the dark and hear the screaming of the lambs." She had nodded. "And do you think if you saved poor Catherine, the lambs would stop screaming?" She hadn't answered then, but now she had. She had saved Catherine. She had stopped the killer. She had faced her greatest fear. And still the lambs screamed. Clarice didn't tell anyone about the letter. It felt too personal, too sacred and too horrifying. Lecter had written it with perfect grammar, flowing calligraphy, and a chill that settled in the marrow of her bones. He had made no threats, no promises, just questions, and a gentle reminder that he was still out there. The FBI was in chaos about his escape. They had issued alerts worldwide. Airports, embassies, and law enforcement agencies in over 30 countries had his face and name. But it didn't matter. Lecter was invisible now. Too brilliant. Too patient. No one would find him unless he wished to be found. But he had found her. That alone was enough to remind her that this case would never truly be over. Not for her. Not while he walked the earth. Somewhere in the Caribbean, a man in a white linen suit sat at a small cafe table by the sea. His eyes scanned the street with idle curiosity. He sipped a glass of fine wine. His silver hair was neat, combed back. His posture, elegant. He looked to a passerby like a retired academic, maybe a writer or a diplomat. He seemed harmless, but his mind, behind those soft gray eyes, was sharp as a scalpel. He had read every local newspaper, watched every name on the Port Authority. He kept track of hotel arrivals. And today a name had caught his eye. Dr. Frederick Chilton, the man who once ran the Baltimore hospital where Lecter had been imprisoned. The man who had violated Lecter's privacy, sold information for fame, and treated him like an animal. Chilton had flown to this island for a medical conference. He was staying at a seaside resort. He didn't know he was being watched, but he was. Lecter rose slowly from his seat, left a few coins beside his untouched espresso, and walked down the cobblestone street, his footsteps echoing faintly as the wind stirred the palm trees. He didn't rush. He would enjoy the next part. Back in Virginia, Clarice sat alone in her room at Quantico, the badge beside her on the nightstand, Lecter's letter folded neatly in the drawer below. The lights were off. The shadows crept in from the corners. In her mind, the well reappeared. The basement, the screams, the click of the hammer, the sound of her gun firing in total darkness. And then silence. She closed her eyes and remembered the LAMBS again. But this time, she tried something different. She didn't run from the sound. She listened. She sat with it. And slowly, breath by breath, the screaming began to quiet. Not vanish, but soften. It would take time. But maybe, just maybe, she had started to find what Lecter had teased from her all along. Not just courage, but peace. The end.